And we're live with Barry Ritholtz, just in the afterglow of publishing a big new book. Are you still feeling proud and great, or has what's happened in the markets and the economy changed anything, soured the release of your new book, which is so good, How Not to Invest? Hello.
Hello. No, I think all this mayhem has kind of made it more timely. Maybe I got a little lucky with the craziness from April 2nd, because a big part of what I'm describing in the book is take control of your information flow. Make sure you're reading people and watching people and listening to people who are worth your time. Recognize that very often, I just had an argument with somebody about everything I read online should be free. It's like, okay, you run a financial services business. Should all your services be free? Well, no, I got to hire people. Okay, so why not support journalism and democracy? Here's the dirty little secret. I used to ask crowds this all the time when I was speaking at events. What does radio and TV sell? And people always say the same thing. They sell advertising. No, advertisers are the buyers. You're the product. They sell you. And today we cross-reference you because the United States has such weak, at least when compared to Europe, weak consumer privacy laws, that we can cross-reference that with your browsing habits, your credit scores, your purchase history. So you have no privacy. You are the product for this free media. Facebook and TikTok and Instagram and Twitter and on and on. If it's free, how are they paying the bills? By selling your data.
My question to you is, has anything changed since the book came out?
Well, the book dropped March 18th, and then Liberation Day, as Trump has called it, was April 2nd, and the market, took quite a hit. The economy has clearly slowed. There are some technical reasons why I'm not too concerned about that negative GDP print. The way it's calculated, imports are not produced here, they're imported, so they're subtracted out of GDP. So you end up, when the economy is robust and we're buying a lot of things overseas, it's a net negative. And so despite inheriting a fairly robust economy in Q1, GDP was negative, although the Doge stuff and a lot of the other seems like unplanned chaos is freezing everybody in place. The biggest change that's taken place, look, the future is always inherently unknown, but you usually go through life feeling like you have some degree of clarity. And what I mean by that is, I don't mean you're going to forecast where the market's going to be, but you're going to say to yourself, hey, I want to take the fam down to Disneyland in 6 months. So I'm going to book a hotel, I'm going to book flights, I'm going to plan food, I'm going to plan the whole thing. You do that when you're confident that you're going to have a job, that there aren't going to be sudden demands on your expenses, and that everything isn't going to suddenly cost more. And when you listen to the conference calls of things like JetBlue and Southwest and, of course, Delta, when they say we've seen our bookings 3 and 6 months out suddenly collapse because people are frozen in place. When you do surveys of CEOs, what are your hiring plans? And when you do surveys of CFOs, what are your CapEx spending plans? And everybody is, we're going to wait till the dust settles and we have a little more clarity before we commit to a multi-million-dollar or billion-dollar set of investments. You can, through lack of transparency and excess confusion, cause everybody to just kind of freeze. And that's what's changed. Everybody's sort of frozen in place. Tariffs are on, tariffs are off. Tariffs are on, no, there's an exception for iPhones. Now there's no exception. Now there's an exception for cars. Well, not really. There's a 90-day pause. You can't run a business if you don't know what your cost structure is going to be. And
And
this is changing the cost structure.
Every quarter, big companies, public companies, they have shareholder calls and they make, they talk about their earnings and they talk about forecasts. My understanding is how it works. And a couple of companies just canceled the phone call. They're like, we're not going to talk about our forecast. There's just not enough information for us to make a responsible prediction. Is that they can do that? Did that happen with more than a couple of companies? I feel like that's been happening.
It's happened with a lot of companies. And look, so why do we do quarterly calls? It's SEC mandated. People have to come around and say, here's how much you're an owner of the company. We're reporting to you. Here's how we've done. Here's our revenue. Here's our expenses. Here are our profits. There's no obligation to say, and here's our best guess at what things look like in the future, because nobody knows. Hey, a big part of the book is nobody knows anything about what's going to happen in the future. But, you typically have all this business intelligence and data. Your salespeople are saying, I have hard commitments for shipping these goods next quarter in September, in December, and I have soft commitments for we're looking for this much. As we get closer, we'll sign a contract. Like, people just don't go to the store and buy stuff today. There's a giant economic infrastructure behind that involves logistics and planning and making purchases off in the future and shipping and transport. And, all that business intelligence, thanks to technology, you can see exactly what is selling today, what the demand is for things in 6 months, maybe not much beyond that. But what we're hearing from corporate executives is demand has fallen significantly in the out months, in part as a reaction to the chaos in Washington, D.C. And I don't know how else to describe it. Like, I try to go right down the middle and be nonpartisan. But, I don't want to engage in false equivalency. Let me give you my favorite example, and then I'll shut the hell up for a few minutes. When the Federal Reserve changes interest rate policy, right? The Federal Reserve says, hey, we think that inflation has fallen enough that we don't have to continue raising rates, and we expect to start lowering rates in the second half of next year. And then 6 months go by, hey, we told you this a few months ago. We think in 2 or 3 Fed meetings, we're going to start cutting rates. And then a month before the Fed meeting, fans out all the Federal Reserve 12 district presidents, and they speak at the Petroleum Club of Houston and the Economic Club at New York, and they speak at Yale, and they just go all over and, hey, so we think that the time is getting close for us to cut rates. And then the dot plot changes. And then the day, that's where everybody's individual expectation of where rates will be. And then the Fed meeting comes and they cut 25 basis points. And then Jerome Powell has a press conference. And then a few weeks later, the transcript comes out. Nobody is shocked. Nobody is surprised. The whole thing was very professionally communicated, transparently. The market knows exactly what's coming, and even then, they occasionally get it wrong, but you can't accuse the Federal Reserve of shocking the market. Even though everybody knew what Trump did tariff-wise in his first term, April 2nd, people were generally stunned and dismayed and shocked by what was being done, with or without Doge, which raises all sorts of other problems.
Right.
But when you turn around and what is the stock market except a discounting mechanism of expected revenue and profits in the future? Why am I paying $100 for this company? Because I think a year from now, 3 quarters from now, 6 months from now, it will generate this many billions of dollars in revenue and this many millions of dollars in profits. So it's worth paying X today because we think it's going to be Y. When the market sells off 5% a day for 2, 3, 4 days in a row, what the market is saying, and I hate when I hear people say this because it's always a subjective interpretation and a Rorschach test, but I'm going to play it right down the middle. The market is essentially saying we did not anticipate an impact on our revenues corporate revenues of this much. So we're lowering our future expectations of sales and profits, which lowers the price of stocks today, because who the hell is who expected 100% tariffs on the whole world?
Well, you say that you try to be nonpartisan down the middle, and I know that you have in the past, but I mean, like, those days are gone at this point, given that economic policy is driven by one man's ego and has no semblance really in any economic policy or monetary policy that any conservative or anybody. This is crazy. This is all him. His own. Nobody in all of economics or finance thinks that these across the board tariffs, you said they're paused, they're not paused, are a good idea. The way that they were done, the way that they've been carried out, with no organization, no warning. His own people don't know what he's doing. They don't talk to him. And he's doing this all obviously so companies and countries and law firms and universities come to him and ask him for permission to have their money back, to have their certainty back, to have their tariffs taken away. This is all about one man's ego. It's not based on any economic, financial policy that we've ever seen. And so there's no way to predict what's coming, except for the fact that the ports on the West Coast are empty. And I see and hear and talk to people that are saying this is like pre-pandemic in terms of supply chain disruption, which will cause inflation. And I don't know if you think anything differently about any of that, but if it's true, then when could it ever go back, if ever?
So let's flesh all that out. And some of the stuff you said, I just want to annotate a little bit.
Okay, good luck.
So first, I spend most of my time looking at crowd behavior, right? When we talk about sentiment, when we talk about inflation expectations, when we talk about prices, you're looking at crowds of decision makers, and collectively their decision has an impact. When we look back through history, that has never turned on the whims of a single person. I mean, you have to go back to Genghis Khan and Julius Caesar.
He's that guy.
That's the position you're arguing, and I'm not disagreeing with. I am saying it's very hard to plan for the future. You know, there's an expression amongst criminal attorneys. You know, hey, what are my chances in this case? Depends on what the judge had for breakfast. What does that mean? Humans are humans. We are subject. We're subjective. We're not rational calculating machines. And sometimes, you get lucky with a judge, and sometimes you get unlucky with a judge. This has never happened at this level before, where it's, I don't know what the right word is, arbitrary, whimsical, capricious, random, that the decisions don't seem to make any sense. And remember, in the first, when Trump was president in 2017, I think it was Jared Kushner who had to search the world to find Peter Navarro, because there weren't any economists who thought this was a good idea. They found the one guy.
And Peter Navarro had to search for the world for someone who agreed with him, and he made up somebody.
So I don't care about the inside DC political machinations. What I look at and what my clients expect me to do is say, figure out what's going on and give us an objective assessment of what the risks we're facing. And I literally posted that last week on the site, which
how can you or anybody figure out what's going on if it all hinges on, you said, the whimsical, the madness of our king?
So what you can't, and so when you can't give look, the world is complicated and it's not black and white, it's not binary. So you can say, what's the best case scenario? What's the worst case scenario? What are all the gradations in between? And the best case scenario is, this is 3D chess. This is a negotiating tactic. He'll eventually walk all this back because I'm giving you the best case scenario. I'm not telling you what's going to happen. The best case scenario is, hey, legitimately, China is a bad player on the global trade stage. They steal intellectual property. They treat our companies unfair. They hack corporate America. They don't treat our companies and investors fairly with their products in China. And so there's grounds for discussion. What feels reckless to me is playing Russian roulette, putting one bullet in a revolver and spinning it in order to play a game with the U.S. $28 trillion economy in order to squeeze concessions from China. That feels very asymmetrical. Your upside is this, but your downside, the worst case scenario, is the end of Pax Americana, the end of the dollar as the world's reserve currency, as the U.S. as a trusted ally and military, political, and economic leader. And once the dollar is no longer a reserve currency of the world, why would anyone want to buy our bonds and fund our debt?
Right.
Like, this has the potential, the worst case scenario, and again, this is not my prediction. I'm giving you the tails. I'm giving you the outliers. This has the potential to really become a debacle. I'm friendly with Ben Hunt of Epsilon Theory, who wrote a piece, The End of Pax Americana. He's like way out there in terms of what I think is a worst case scenario. This is what it would look like if it really goes off the rails. That's his forecast. And he is laying out in great detail the global political, military, international relations problems that this sort of we haven't tried this since Smoot-Hawley in the 1930s, and that made the Great Depression worse. So it's kind of shocking. The reason the market failed to anticipate this is because everybody said, well, we should take him seriously, not literally. Nobody would do that. That's economic suicide. And so the market spasm was, Jesus, this is a problem. The rally you have seen since off of the lows are, hey, cooler heads are going to prevail. The adults will be in charge. This will all be walked back. He doesn't have the cards. But that isn't its own problem, because suddenly the rest of the world realizes, maybe we need China more than we need the United States. That's a bad outcome.
Then that's a very possible outcome. I've linked to this Ben Hunt Epsilon Theory, Crashing the Car of Pax Americana article that Barry just mentioned. I've linked to it.
Ben, by the way, is a super smart guy, former hedge fund manager, really more of a pure academic, and just his brain goes places where most of us are afraid to wander, and he's so interesting to read. And I'm always like, oh my God.
Is he ever...
What's that?
Is he ever correct in his prediction?
Sure, he's been right about a lot of things. I mean, he's an intellectual who wants people to consider the range of possibilities they haven't. And he's been talking about this for a few months. So when April 2nd came out and then Crashing the Car of Pax Americana came out, I mean, he was like, hey, I've been telling you guys, he's serious as a heart attack about this crazy stuff. Don't take him seriously. Take him literally. So far, he's been proven right about this.
Oh, great.
But I really want people to just understand, look, nobody knows what's going to happen in the future. Let me remind everybody that the tariff power lay in Congress, and Congress has the ability to take it back. Well, so I suspect if this will have to get worse before it gets better. But who knows? Maybe this is 3D chess, and maybe this is just a brilliant negotiating tactic.
Come on.
Maybe.
Come on.
I don't think that's the case, but I would love to be wrong about that. 3D chess. This is like disproven. Look, you know what? We all engage in false equivalency, and I try not to. You can't say, well, the Earth is an oblate spheroid, says these people, but the flat earthers, they make some good points. You can't do that. There is, when it comes to tariff policy, it's flat Earth sort of stuff. So your natural instinct is to say, no one can seriously believe this, so something else has to be going on. By the way, I said that about George W. Bush's invasion of Iraq. Look, nobody believes this. I wrote a piece on this. Nobody believes this.
Oh, great. Well,
Nobody believes that this is about hidden WMDs in Iraq. There's got to be something else. And I was wildly wrong. That was 22 years ago, and I was completely wrong about that because I assumed the rationality of the President of the United States. You're not just going to take us to war for no reason, are you? But by the way, that's not the country that attacked us on September 11th. It's the other country. Why are you moving troops from the bad country to a third country? I was completely wrong about that. It made no sense. It's still to this day. No, I have yet to hear a rational explanation for why that war happened and why we dropped the ball in Afghanistan and why we let the Saudis off the hook. What was it? 21 of 23 9/11 terrorists were Saudis? How did that happen? So sometimes when you look at like really irrational behavior and say, nobody can be that like reckless. So I'm mixing my wishful thinking with trying to figure out what comes next. And I can't tell what's going to happen next. I don't think anybody can.
The United States has apparently, according to Reuters, approached China seeking talks over Trump's 145% tariffs, according to a social media account affiliated with Chinese state media. This is being reported today by a number of outlets. I mean, it wasn't going to be China approaching the U.S. If this were easy, the U.S.-China relationship, you mentioned some of the transgressions over the past, 10, 20 years, then Bush, Obama, Trump, Biden would have been able to fix the issues around IP, around trade imbalances, and all the rest. It's not simple. It's very complex, which is why Trump's gamut here has already failed, and they stopped sending shit from China, and they're predicting that, as Trump said yesterday, maybe you won't be able to get $30 at cheap prices, maybe just $2 at a little higher prices. Did you hear him say that?
Yeah, I heard.
Imagine if any Democrat said there's going to be some pain and taxes are going to go up, and you're not going to be able to get all the toys you want for Christmas because of my policies.
So that's what I mean by I think it gets worse before it gets better. So here's a little bit of wishful thinking. So wishful thinking A is Congress grows a spine.
No,
and enough
yesterday. Three Republicans to take back control of this emergency, bullshit emergency control act that they declared. And three Republicans voted with Democrats, 49-49. A couple Democrats weren't there. Regardless, the House isn't going to take it up for a vote. Johnson
not until it gets worse. It's going to get worse, and a few people will start to say, right now the fear is I'm going to get primaried on my right by someone from MAGA, and you need, again, I'm not a political analyst. I'm spitballing here. The reason I say it gets worse before it gets better, I have vivid recollection in October 2008 when the world was falling apart post Lehman Brothers, and a group of moderate Republicans and Democrats introduced legislation to give the Fed the tools.
That was 200 years ago in pre-Trump.
But let me remind you that it was voted down initially by the Rand Paul libertarian. And the market took a giant dump, and by Friday it passed overwhelmingly. People were terrified and like, fuck it, we have to do that. So that's what I mean by it has to get worse before it gets better. So wishful thinking A is a handful of Republicans who are in either purple states or states that Trump won, but just barely, and they're starting to recognize that they're going to get primaried from the middle. They come to their senses, and then the next president appoints Barack Obama as our global ass-kissing ambassador to repair the damage that this administration did and walk this back. That's my best case scenario.
I like your best case scenario. Let's talk about what's happening in different sectors right now, because obviously you've talked a lot about the money markets, but I mean, housing is in real trouble for a number of reasons before tariffs. Tourism is in real trouble because nobody wants to come to America anymore because they hate us, A, and B, they're worried they might get kidnapped. um,
Ridiculous.
we could talk about automobiles. We could talk about, we should probably talk about crypto, because he's doing everything he can to create a new form of currency so that the Trump family can get rich while the rest of us get fucked.
How about McDonald's? I mean,
and McDonald's just reported, you tweeted about this earlier, or you posted about it earlier. They had like no growth or something like that. Why is that
the biggest drop in U.S. sales since the peak of the COVID-19 pandemic 5 years ago?
What is the most popular, arguably, fast food chains profits measure?
The spending habits of the bottom half of the economic strata. And so what that's telling us is that, like, so I have a buddy who lives in the Berkshires, and like off in the woods. And he's surrounded by, within an hour drive, dozens of universities and research facilities and hospitals. And the Doge cuts are already leading people. Now, by the way, there's a whole nother discussion. Congress has allocated this money. It is not within the authority of the White House to cancel it. And we've already seen, 100, 200 lawsuits saying, sorry, this is, and they are proceeding just as they proceeded in 2020, all the litigation where the president lost 62 out of 63 cases. They're proceeding apace, and the White House is not doing well in litigation. And I hate like hell to rely on courts to save the process, but Congress is in charge of budget and disperses it. The White House is not authorized to say, we're not giving money to fill in the blank. And the most egregious examples are pediatric cancer research and blah, blah, blah. But all these people, we're doing real damage to our scientific base. Research is being canceled. Research animals are being euthanized. People are being let go. Yeah, arguably, this is starting to turn into the early days. Let's call this pre-recession. But it won't take much for what was someone just tweeted the Wall Street Journal headline from October 31st. Whoever gets elected inherits an incredibly robust economy. This is all self-inflicted. And, you diet and exercise in order to achieve a certain goal, but theoretically it's worth it. You're healthier, you live longer, you look better. Great. This seems to be very asymmetrical, that the reckless asymmetry of putting the entire global economy at risk and the United States relationship everywhere else, that's why you get Ben Hunt's crash of the Pax Americana regime, which is very, very frightening.
Yeah, it's very, very frightening. I mean, I'm sure investors are panicking, right? What are you?
No, market's up today. April, I think NASDAQ was up for the month, which is kind of.
I don't think these markets are representative of what's happening in the economy. I think this is some kind of what's it called in your world? I mean, they're in denial.
Listen, markets aren't perfect. They don't get it perfectly right all the time, but they get it more or less right most of the time. And let me tell you why I say that. So you look at the financial circumstances during the pandemic when everybody felt the world was coming to an end. And the market was essentially saying, we'll figure this out. There's going to be a giant fiscal stimulus that'll help the country. There'll eventually be a vaccine. This has been in development. mRNA has been in development for 10 years. And let me tell you, as the first 3 months of like April, May, June, I had constant emails from clients and media and like, gee, the market's gone berserk. It's detached from reality. No, it figured out that we would get through this. And so I'm not a big fan of saying the market always knows best, the wisdom of crowds, because crowds are right most of the time until, the trend is your friend until the bend at the end is the joke that it rhymes, so it has to be true. But we're in a set of circumstances where, call it a failure of imagination. None of us believed anybody would do something that is so obviously counter to, let's call it, accepted his economic principles. That's why everybody is shocked. Like, wait, like how often in your life have you heard of a friend who did, wait, he did what? Was he drunk? No, he did that when he was sober? Oh my God, that seems crazy. That's kind of where we are now.
Yeah, that's not the best analogy because there's never been anybody like this guy ever that is in any kind of power of any kind of organization that is so irresponsible and so driven by his own ego, not even his own interests, not even his own political interests. But
I think he's pretty good at maintaining an eye on his own personal interests. He's done a good job, and I think we don't give him enough credit. Like, it's one thing to get lucky occasionally. I think he is a shockingly good reader of the public's mood and a surprisingly excellent communicator for someone with a limited vocabulary. I mean, he's just kicked everybody's ass time and time again. How many primaries, how many elections does he have to win before people say, what is going on here? Something is happening. And something is happening. You've never had anyone like him before in American history.
And he's destroyed everything he touches.
That was Rick Wilson's book.
I mean, he destroyed this country during COVID. He told us that it wasn't going to be that bad and it would just go away, and 1 million people died. He's doing the exact same thing now.
More than 1 million. And in fact, when you look at the U.S., so whenever anyone says what you're saying, and I'm in a mixed crowd of people of different political persuasions.
I know a lot of your friends are fucking idiots.
They politically disagree with you.
No, they're just idiots. They're selfish pricks.
What my response in that sort of mixed crowd is, the data shows that amongst industrialized Western economies, the United States performance as an entity with a healthcare system was far worse in terms of mortality rates, vaccination rates, survival rates.
Of course.
And, I don't want to just look, I could just say to people who I debate with, you're a selfish idiot. And of course, that's not going to change anybody's minds. But what I try and do is say to people, look, here's what the data is. And if you're going to tell me the data doesn't matter, then we're done having this conversation because, if your beliefs matter more than the facts, then I'm never going to convince you you belong to a cult or you belong to an ideology that
I think that what I think that you are missing in your analysis of Trump and the political analysis of his record is that he's good at convincing people to vote for him. He's terrible at doing the job once he gets it. He did nothing when he was president the first time but pass a major tax cut for wealthy people. He destroyed and divided the country. He destroyed our relationships with other countries, and he made it easier for Russia to exist in the world. And now, in under 100 days, he's had the worst 100 days as any president ever. He hasn't passed any legislation. Which
is shocking to me. How is that possible? You have the House and the Senate,
because he doesn't. Because I'm telling you,
I'm trying to approach this in a. I don't want to just be in my little bubble and have everybody sing Kumbaya to each other.
No, the guy, you don't have to be in your bubble to know that the straight analysis is he actually thinks that an executive order is equal to legislation.
I don't believe that. I think he doesn't want to do the hard work of political analytical legislation. Like, that is hard work, and that is not his forte.
He could get Republicans to vote for a gun ban if he wanted to. He could get anything.
Why hasn't there been a budget passed? Why hasn't there been, a grand bargain? Why hasn't there been a tax cut passed? Like, if he could do that.
Because he can't govern. Because,
you and I are arguing at cross purposes. Like, here's the problem with executive orders. The next president comes in and signs an order, everything Trump signed is now overturned. Every executive order of the previous president is. That's why legislation is important, and all of these executive orders, some of which cross constitutional boundaries, such as not spending the money as directed by Congress, which is why there's so much litigation. And he just lost 7-2 and 9-0 in the Supreme Court. Yeah. And where eventually either he will follow what the court does, or we're going to have a crisis, what the court orders, or we're going to have a crisis. But I'm like not in the crisis is inevitable or the crisis is here yet, but it's certainly out there. And so, you know, I keep saying you could sign all the executive orders you want, and the repercussions of some of these are damaging. And I think it will get worse before it gets better, but it's not the same thing as passing legislation.
I think he thinks it is.
I cannot. I'm not going to convince you otherwise because I don't know what the hell he thinks.
I do.
I can't read into his mind.
I can.
It's too easy and lazy to say, "Oh, this guy is just clueless." Blah blah blah. I'm not giving him credit for being a legislative genius, but I will admit to being perplexed as to why they haven't passed legislation, which, by the way, is far more long-lasting and impactful than these, you know, performative auto pen executive orders.
It's ridiculous. Have you paid any attention or much to the healthcare sector, and particularly what he's doing at NIH, and particularly what hospitals, research facilities, and
it's bad. It's really bad.
Are having to deal with? I mean, one could argue that America became a rich and powerful country because after World War II, we invested in science and research and sold it all to the world.
And attracted the greatest scientists from around the globe. Hey, this is a cliche. Half of the C-suite in the biggest the top 1,000 Silicon Valley companies, public and private, are immigrants who came to America to pursue the American dream. First generation immigrants, and if you go to second generation, it's like a majority. Like we're comfortable, and you know they're like hungry and like, oh my God, this is the land of opportunity. Why would anyone? And by the way, Bush did this post 9/11. Why would you want to discourage the best and the brightest from around the world from coming to American universities and staying here afterwards? P.S. Catherine Rampell at the Washington Post wrote a great piece. Why is Trump attacking America's greatest export?
Yeah.
What is our greatest export? Higher education. People come from around the world. It's not just Columbia, Yale, Harvard. It's the entire ecosystem.
How do you measure the effect that has on the economy? Even just the healthcare sector, much less healthcare. I mean,
very hard to measure. Tell me what the value today of a person in 2036 curing pediatric cancer. I can't tell you what that is, but I could tell you it would be bad if that doesn't happen, and if it didn't happen because of this sort of, I don't even know what to talk. Is it xenophobia? Is it? I don't know. I can't. And a lot of this goes back. Look, the United States has been a questionable actor when it comes to race and country of origin. From our origins with slavery to Japanese internment to what took place with stopping grad students after 9/11 to this today, right? I mean, and yet despite that, people from around the world come here or at least they have been, and contribute mightily to our circumstances. So let me make this rational for a minute, just for a second. Look, in my lifetime, we had September 11th terrorist attacks, and I was in New York, and my office was headquartered in Two World Trade. So that's a vivid memory in the midst of the dot-com implosion. And then 7 years later, we had the great financial crisis, and that was a disaster. And then we had the pandemic where we performed so poorly. And I have to stop and ask myself, is this going to be worse than any of those three? Because we managed to get through all of those,
Well,
although arguably they are a factor leading to this
they
today.
are, everything's connected, but the
Yes.
difference in all of those different crises, there were several different factors that contributed to it. This is one crazy person. He could have just added onto what every economist described as an unbelievable economy given the circumstances for just years before it. Nobody predicted it would be as good as it was. He could have just rode that out, but one guy. Let me ask you, I know you got to go. You got to go one more?
No, I'm just watching the screen to see where markets are.
Well,
I'm
well,
here.
my last question is about investments in renewable energy, because he is seemingly canceling previous investments made by the last administration and closing factories that were under construction or had been signed and invested in. And he's talking about old fossil fuel. He's talking about putting Americans to work, several generations apparently, putting together iPhones. He's closing existing factories that would be making things for the future to open like factories that would make wooden wheels and be running cotton gins. It's bizarre, the investment in the past that he's making, and seemingly canceling the investment in the future based on the
He's trying to, and the pushback I would give you is the Inflation Reduction Act, which included a lot of legislation passed by Congress, signed by President Biden, that allocated money to this. There's litigation about this. He's doing damage. The question is how much of it can be walked back. I am constantly forced to remind people we don't live in a world as it exists. We live in the world as we exist.
Right.
The headlines we read, the algorithms that excite us, there's a lot of noise, but you sometimes have to look below the noise and say, is this really happening? And that's the shift from soft data, the sentiment stuff that's got you all excited, to the hard data, which is the economic information that gets me concerned and excited. So we're seeing airlines tell us that people aren't booking flights. We're hearing the head of the port in LA, one of the biggest ports in the country, telling us that container traffic is dropping 35%. You don't just push a button and a ship arrives. It takes 10 days to get here.
Right.
So 2-3 weeks, that traffic is coming down. I don't want to just cherry pick data, but so it's travel, it's McDonald's, it's goods shippings, it's all the GM just said they see there's a $5 billion cost to tariffs, so automobiles are going to be in trouble. There are a lot of warning signs, and what I say to you is this will get better, but not until it gets much worse. I'm not big on forecasts, but the only way this gets better. So let me remind you of my favorite little tidbit from the pandemic. Like the early days of the pandemic, things were kind of starting to show up as odd. I have a vivid recollection of my sister was visiting from the city, and hey, as long as you're out here, let's go to Target and we'll load up on to take your stuff back into the city. No toilet paper. I don't remember if it was January of 2020, but it was before we were full blown. Like, hey, that's like, hey, I was like, shit's happening here. No pun intended. And I remember as things started to get worse, there was an attempt to rename a library in Washington, D.C. And the Democrats and the Republicans could, who cares? It's meaningless nonsense. And they could not agree. And then the next day was when the NBA canceled the season. No more games. We're canceling games. And then suddenly we're in lockdown mode. And Congress, on a nearly unanimous and obviously bipartisan basis, passed the biggest fiscal stimulus as a percentage of GDP since World War II. So shit gets really bad, and that's why I gave you that October 2008 example. They refused to pass the bill authorizing the Fed to do stuff. The people started to panic, and then every congressman wakes up with a pit in their stomach. I'm going to not only be thrown out of office, but they're going to do a recall. They're not even waiting for the election. I got to do something. And so eventually you called people, what did you say? They were selfish pricks. Everybody deep down inside is selfish. They care about their own self-preservation and their jobs. And at a certain point, if this gets bad enough, people in D.C. are going to say, hey, fealty to a guy who's going to get me fired. Who's the head of national security? Had a safe Republican seat for, 6 years, 8 years? About to get shit canned. Like at a certain point, people are going to say, hey, what's the old joke? Every man for himself, said the elephant who danced amongst the chickens. That's what's going to happen at a certain point. People are going to say, I'm not taking a bullet for this guy. I got to, women and children first up until a point. And then these people are pushing everyone out of the lifeboat. It's got to get worse before it gets better, or at least my two big frames of reference, the pandemic and the financial crisis. I always go back to history. I don't know what happens, but historically, when we've been in an environment like this, it needs to get really bad before it gets better.
President Jim Jones, someone wrote in the chat. I appreciate your humility.
I'm not saying drink the Kool-Aid and kill yourself. I'm saying sometimes it takes a crisis before people... Winston Churchill, you can always rely on the Americans to do the right thing after they've exhausted every other possibility.
It's a pretty accurate quote, and he was a fairly smart guy. My friend, we appreciate you joining us as always. I hope everybody goes and buys your book, How Not to Invest, and supports you and follows you everywhere. There it is.
I'm having fun talking about it. It's doing really well. It's the number one on Amazon in investing, and
there you go.
It's just been a blast talking to people about it. Wholly unintentional discussions of information hygiene and knowing what to focus on and looking at data and managing your own behavior. I can tell you I've had conversations with people over the past month and a half. Hey, man, you don't want to panic yet. You got to just take a deep breath because people are starting to really get nervous.
Yeah.
And, if history is a guide, we know the path. It's going to do this before it does this. I'm not just talking markets. I'm talking sentiment, economics, people's behavior, people's headspace. Like you would think you would be inured to this sort of chaos, but whenever I hear people talk about uncertainty, I always feel like what they're saying is we have lost the ability to lie to ourselves. The future is never certain. You never know what's going to happen. That's just a fact. I use in the book, I use all the examples about people passing on Star Wars, not thinking the Beatles did a good job on Ed Sullivan, people saying, I don't want to, Squid Games, John Wick. There's like endless examples. So nobody knows what the future is like. But we can look at history and say, here's what this says to us. And, dumb luck that the book came out right into the teeth of this mayhem.
Congratulations, and thank you very much. Appreciate you for joining us.
My pleasure anytime, Pete.
For watching live. I'm going to end now.